Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's seminar hosted by Queens University Belfast and InterTradeIreland as part of the All-Ireland Innovation Programme. And we're just going to leave it a moment or so just to allow everyone who has registered to get into the room, and then we will kick off the session. Okay, so for those of you who have just joined us, you're very, very welcome to this afternoon's session with Matthew Anderson on disruptive leadership, in particular disruptive innovation for SMEs. We are scheduled to start just within the next moment or so, but we're just allowing a little time to let everyone get into the room and get comfortable for the next hour or so of the workshop. Okay, so I think we'll kick off in the hope that the rest of those who are registered to join the session will be able to access us at some stage within the next few moments. So just to introduce myself, folks, my name is Joanne Mallon. I work in the business engagement team here at Queen's University, and I am delighted to welcome you to this online innovation workshop entitled Disruptive Innovation for SMEs, which is delivered as part of the InterTradeIreland All-Ireland Innovation Programme. And we are at Queen's very pleased to collaborate with 3 other university partners to deliver this programme of innovation talks and masterclasses. Those 3 universities are University College Cork, NUI Galway, and our newest partner, which is Trinity College Dublin. The InterTradeIreland All-Ireland Innovation Programme has been running for over 10 years, and we are delighted that it has helped to inspire a huge number of SMEs to adapt and to use innovation as a tool for growth and development in their organisations. And I have no doubt that today's event will inspire also. And before I introduce today's main speaker, Dr. Matthew Anderson, I'll just outline the format of this afternoon's event. So Matthew's main presentation will kick off now and run through until approximately 12:35. We will then spend the remainder of the session taking questions from you, the audience, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as possible. So please get involved, folks. Type your questions in the question box where Matthew will be able to read them, and myself and my colleagues here at Queen's, as and when they come into your head. Otherwise, you will have an opportunity at that time to submit a question. We aim to finish up promptly at 1 o'clock. Okay, so this brings me to the official introduction of our speaker. So Dr. Matthew Anderson is Professor of Disruptive Leadership at KEDGE Business School in Paris. And from France is where he is actually joining us this morning. He is also a visiting scholar at Queens University Belfast. We're delighted to have him. Matthew is also co-founder of strategic consultant partners, the Y Elephant, based in Paris, and a recent TEDx speaker for TEDx Queens University Belfast, where he gave an amazing talk on the topic of how leaders win and lose the transformative power of trust. In today's seminar, Matthew will share some simple and fast-flowing tips from his recent work in disruptive innovation. He will pay particular attention to specific and often neglected issues of leveraging purpose and power in innovation. And so without further ado, I'll hand you over to Matthew to kickstart today's workshop, Disruptive Innovation for SMEs, Tips for Navigating Purpose and Power. Matthew.
Super. Thanks, Joanne. Super sample. Very nice introduction. I hope some of it's true at least. And so basically, I'm Matthew, and I want to try and talk about some things that are less discussed in innovation. They seem to be sort of often perceived as being afterthoughts, but the work I do tends to push this to the front. It seems to be these are the bigger questions that we should be asking up front. But quickly to introduce myself, obviously, background in innovation in lots of different ways. So from tech startup in oil and gas, sort of data monitoring stuff, through to being a chief transformation officer of an energy company. I've been strategy director in another company. I've been chief innovation officer at a consulting firm in Paris. So I spent a lot of time looking at both product and service innovations. And for the first thing I'm going to say is that I certainly don't know as much as I think I know. I certainly don't think I can give everyone sort of solutions. But what I think I can do is I think I can trigger some thoughts. So what I'm going to try and do in the next 30 minutes or so is, instead of try to solve any of your challenges, just bring up some observations I've had based on recent interactions with clients. The good news is I spend all of my life inside different types of clients, different scales of clients, looking at how they revolutionize or evolve the business model and the operating models. So that's where I'm super interested. It's leadership accompaniment, and the reason that we call it leadership partners is because it's more than just strategy partners. It's more than just saying, let's do not to disparage any large consulting firms, but this is not just a PowerPoint presentation after 6 months of analysis that then is given to the client and put in the shelves. For us, it'll be an accompaniment. It'll be the wicked problems that have to be resolved in innovation. So I think today's talk is pretty much going to be about the wicked problems that we have in innovation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my slide deck, because seeing as I don't see any of your wonderful faces, then we're just going to have to share the slide deck. So we've done that. Right, so my keyword here is simple, because it's half an hour. We're not going to dive deep, but what I thought we'd do is we'd do some anecdotal stuff around purpose and power and innovation. I'll start with purpose and then flip. And what do I mean by purpose? Purpose and innovation is normally like, why do we need to innovate? So there's two answers to that question. One is because if you're an innovation person on this call, which I'm sure you all are, you get bored if you're not innovating. So you've got that spirit of discovery, I think is what Mercayanis calls it in Purpose, where he says, you're the magician types that need to be part of discovery modes and organizations. So there's a bit of that. But then there's also the question of, why do we need to innovate from a user or customer or the other end perspective? Because yes, we all get bored very quickly and need to come up with new ideas, but are they the ideas that the other end wants? And I've got so many examples, and we'll talk about this a bit today, of where the purpose is slightly misaligned, that it seems like we might be innovating for ourselves. We might be innovating to keep ourselves excited, might be innovating to keep ourselves competitive internally, might be innovating because we've been told to innovate, right? These are bad reasons to innovate. So why do we need to innovate is a good question to ask, and I'll come on to this in a moment. Next one, what impacts are we intending to have with innovation? Like, to what end are we innovating? It's very romantic to imagine that like Nikola Tesla will create some amazing innovation, and then 100 years down the line, someone will uplift it and do something spectacular. Most of us don't have that sort of, no offense, and I'm sure there's some people much better than me on this call, but most people don't transform the world with their innovations. So what are the impacts you're intending to have inside your sphere of influence, inside your interaction with your industry, with your market, with your colleagues, with your customers? And then the last one, who is this good for? Now Matthew, these are really simple questions. Well, let me give you, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of anecdotes in a second. And you'll start to see that if you don't have who this is good for in mind, the purpose of your innovation might not be as sincere or might not be as good for society as you think it is. So anyone that's read Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capital, from Harvard University, she wrote this wonderful book. It's only her second book. I mean, you've got to be quite good if you're a Harvard professor and you only write 2 books in 40 years. Obviously good quality. Her second book was around exactly what I said, in surveillance capitalism, which is the age of Amazon, Google, and Facebook, where data surplus is the innovation, and then the application of it to sell as advertising. Now that's okay, but who is that good for? There is plenty. You wouldn't have the CEOs of all of these organizations in front of government panels if there wasn't a question of who is this actually good for. So I think we can ask that at sort of micro levels and say, it's great to innovate, but are we being good by this? And this is no small subject. So for example, the idea of good is something really hard to define. I know I'm eating into my 35 minutes, but it's a good question, because in leadership theory, for example, you've got something like 100 publications written a day on leadership, but there's only a handful, literally maybe 5 or 6 articles written on good leadership. Like, what does it mean to have good leadership? It's a really hard thing to define. It's about societal impact. It's about protecting the environment. These things make sense today, but they didn't 10 years ago. No one was talking about it. So what it means by good is something that's going to evolve. Right, let me give you some super fast anecdotal lessons on or insights on some of the challenges of purpose and innovation. So given this idea of why am I innovating, what impacts am I intending to have, and who is this good for, let me give you sort of 5 anecdotes, and just to titivate your mind, to sort of stir some of your own sparks and appropriation into your own experiences. Step 1, unintended consequences for the business model. This is where a bit of convoluted purpose has been damaging for a business. Let me give a very quick story of this. This is a client that is a private equity organization that has a portfolio of hospitality schools, education schools in a certain European country. And they are based on the fact that the country they are in, Switzerland, is incredibly amazing, beautiful place, some of the most adorable campuses in the world. Like, it's literally, it's slightly more picturesque than Ireland. Sorry, I'm joking, but it's beautiful, and they sell it based on the campuses. So you go to Montana, perhaps, or somewhere like that, and then you're in the top of these mountains, and everything is just wonderful. But then COVID came, and the pandemic closed the campuses, and the business then asked the question of, gosh, how do we sustain revenue? So how do we sustain our income? Because we're going to have to innovate super fast, because we have a lot of bills in our fancy campuses. So the thing they flipped to almost, I mean, clearly, obviously, was digital courses. So let's go from doing a master's or an MBA in situ in some of the world's most scenic places to let's just create some really high-end, cutting-edge digital learning, right? But then what happens is that you're fundamentally shifting your business model, because what you're saying is we're going to get really good during the next year, during the crisis of COVID, to sell online courses, which is a different business model, different pricing mechanisms, different clients, your marketing in different ways. So you're starting to really reorientate your business towards this revenue. It's almost a new client, right? And that requires a complete shift in how the business is orientated to connect with that client. So what happened was that the business pivoted towards this new revenue source. But the problem is, when COVID started dissipating and the market started opening up, the business then had to challenge itself to say, have we created an alternative, inferior business model, which is actually not competitive? We've jumped ourselves into a commoditized market space by doing digital learning, and we've got these beautiful, shiny, swanky campuses. And how do we sustain this balance? Do we just keep both going? Now it's concurrent strategies. Well, what they found is that wasn't the case. They found that the much less expensive digital courses had high uptake, but getting people back into the campuses for lots of reasons, even things like visas and stuff with the pandemic world, became a lot harder. Now you can see what's going to happen. You're going to get to the point where your capital costs, your assets required to have lots of cash to keep them going. You're then going into transformation. So your innovation had actually inadvertently triggered transformation in a big way in your business, because you couldn't just turn the tap back on in the pre-existing business model. So you might say, but Matthew, that was survival. Yes, but you have to think about that. That's the point of purpose and innovation. You have to think, am I creating unintended consequences for my business model by this reactive innovation? And do I want to do that? It's a very, very good question. Do I want to undermine my key success criteria? All of you are super clever, and I'm sure you've heard of the Bowman's Clock, which is the Bowman's Clock is a strategy model that goes through, like, obviously all the way around, and it starts with differentiation, then it goes through commoditization and a pricing war, and then undifferentiated state, to the point that you start to get blood red oceans where business start going bankrupt and competition becomes horribly inaccessible, that you then have to differentiate again, and then by differentiating again you create space and you increase your margins, you increase your profitability, you create new market segments. The key thing is to create the new market segments, right? What this example number one did was they commoditized the business. They did the exact opposite. Instead of going towards differentiated high margin profitability, they found themselves dropping into a red ocean commoditized space of digital learning, and there's millions of players. So was that smart? Next one, inhumane AI capital management. I should probably have you all sign NDAs before I tell you some of these stories, but let's just think of a very large management consulting firm. And we were having a discrete session amongst executives looking at innovation. And one of the partners of this very large management consultant firm was talking about this exemplar of innovation that they'd done internally on behalf of a government of a certain European country. And in fact, sorry, I'm speaking nonsense. That's point 3. That's the Big Brother is auditing. So I'll tell you the Big Brother is auditing, and then I'll go back to inhumane. So the Big Brother is auditing story is that they then went to this government agency and said, we've got a beautiful idea. Why don't we take artificial intelligence, Google Maps, and then map all of the regions of your country based on tax liability by members of the population, by citizenry, so that we can actually analyze the size of their swimming pool, or the square meterage of the house, or whether or not they put a fence around the garden, or whether or not they've tried to do some building works. So they'd automated the scrutiny process of whether or not citizens were paying their due tax. Now, he was bragging. This was wonderful, he said. And many of you in the call will go, beautiful innovation. I could see how you can sell that very easily. Anything linked to taxation, you can make a lot of money if you're selling a service. Got that. And of course, he was bragging. But in the room was a moral discomfort of every single person that was listening to this idea. And he was the only person that couldn't see it. So there was people in the room going, okay, I understand the business value proposition here, but I'm not sure whether citizens will like this. Like, I'm not sure who this is good for is necessary. Now, you might all say, but we're fully tax-paying, Matthew, and we're all very honest people, and we would never do something in the garden like put a fence up or a shed and not pay our taxes. Yes, that's because you are the 100 or whatever best people in the world. But millions of other people maybe quite like their freedom and are very anxious about state surveillance. So the purpose here of who it's good for in that example was totally lost on the chief innovation officer of this management consulting firm, one of the big fours, one of the biggest in the business, actually. Let's jump back to inhumane AI human capital. It won't have escaped anyone on the call that Amazon has innovated an amazing solution, which is that they use apps to hire and fire drivers. So what they've done is that if you want to become a delivery driver for Amazon, you go onto the app, you plug in your details, your driving license, show that you're clean, show you're reliable, and you've got a vehicle that's not running on coal, etc. And then that goes through the app. The app says, okay, you're suitable to have a job here. So then you get your first automated order through the app. And then what happens is the app then monitors your movements. It monitors your time of delivery. It monitors whether or not you don't select the right routes on maps, Google Maps, whether or not you're particularly slow versus other people. And the aggregation of your performance then there's certain thresholds that the app has. And then there's a point where the app fires you. It just sacks you. So you've never, ever worked for a person in Amazon. What you've done is you work for an app that's accepted your threshold application, monitored your KPIs, and then sacked you if you've not been up to standard. Now, you might think, gosh, that sounds like a wonderful world. Well, I'm not sure many people are going to agree with you on that. There's lots of reasons why we have employment regulations and laws to protect employees from abuses, because you could end up having well, I don't need to explain to this audience. You know exactly the challenge with who that's good for, that one day you got to pay your rent in your house with your couple kids and you realize an app has sacked you because the traffic was sporadically not good for that week because of building works, for example. Right? So very, very challenging. Was that valid? Is the purpose sincere? Is it good for people? Is it creating this sort of positive impact? Or, and here's my last line to you very quickly on this, is disruptive innovation all about maximizing revenue, which is the Christensen idea? So I'm sure many of you will obviously know that the source of disruptive innovation and Christensen's book that was formative about 2 decades ago. And the key thing there was how do you judge good innovation? You judge it by revenue. You judge it. I think that's very limited. I think that you can't afford nowadays to just think that innovation is purely about a business model thing. It's about other things as well. Yes, it's about revenue, but it's certainly about other things. Okay, a couple other examples. Is there maybe greener grass? This is a good example of a hospitality business that wanted to drive an innovative strategy, sort of entrepreneurship competition inside the global business. They had about 120,000 people working in the business, and they wanted to drive sort of local, low-level innovation. So they wanted it to be market level. So they got together and they looked at what is a pretty standard, very established product and service provision. And then the one provision they had for this entire thing was, we need to be using fads. I won't say which fads it is, it's a bit obvious who the client is, but they had a couple, 2 or 3 fads, and they said, we have to push this into our business. But the problem is that they didn't need that in the business. It added no value to the business. It didn't add any value to the business model. It didn't increase sales. It didn't add any value to the workers. In fact, if anything, the ideation just created distance. It was based on a digital native model is what they're trying to go for. So how do we get away from our Luddite workers we have at the moment? Yeah, but it was in the hospitality sector business that was actually about serving food and meals to people. So yes, you can flip towards digital native model, but what's that got to do with serving plates to people in restaurants? So there's a bit of they were searching for this elixir, this philosopher's stone, and they spent a considerable amount of money creating this entrepreneurship program. And every strategy or every idea that was put to them just wasn't dynamic enough, because the frame that they were using for acceptable ideas was just ridiculous. It was just not appropriate to the business. It was completely disconnected from the raison d'être, or the what the business should stand for. And then what happens is you're just literally wasting everyone's time. So searching for something that you can't nail, but you feel you should be following a fad, is obviously wrong, right? That's something you would not apply in innovation. I've never seen it work. And then finally, horizons of innovation. Here's a nice one. This is another Big 4 consulting firm that uses this on their clients, and I quite like it. It's called the horizons of innovation. So you have Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3. Horizon 1 innovation will be innovation that's operational excellence, that's about operating model enhancements, continuous improvement, leaning the processes, tidying up the processes and systems, looking for just more efficient ways of doing things, right? And it doesn't have to be seen as just cost transformation. It can be something, it can really be something about operational excellence, because the drive here is adaptability, which is another way of thinking of innovation, which is how can we apply speed and new ways of thinking to existing processes and systems? How can we apply new solutions? And that's called Horizon 1. And to be honest, you leave people alone to do that. We'll talk about that in a minute. You leave them to do it, because why do you need oversight on that? You know, that is something that should be owned at local levels. And then Horizon 2 is the level where it should be transversal initiatives. So some initiatives that break silos or create like common value. So an example might be an entertainment business that has proprietary ownership of a technology, and that technology does some sort of amazing CGI graphic. Let's just say it's that. Now, the key thing for them is that how do we get that technology applied to many projects across the group, which might have studios in 20 countries around the world? That's transversality. So how can we apply this amazing innovation to everything we do? And sometimes there are these, obviously, these Horizon 2 transversality innovations, which are, we can really apply this to almost all of the products and services we do. And it's just an added value that's nonsensical, right? We have to do it, like to not do it rather. It's just something that we can bag. So let's get on with it. So really, it's about how do you create the structures to share. And then there's Horizon 3, which is, and the best way to think about this is Horizon 3 are innovations that affect the business model. Or another way of describing it, innovations that affect the top line. So imagine Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 are bottom line. So it's everything in between. Horizon 3 innovations will be the top line. So it's revenue, income, sales, stuff that's around how do we differentiate the market space? How do we move into new areas? Now, the interesting thing is that that's fundamentally about purpose in my mind. because I don't know any business that the purpose of the business is quickly altered by a grassroots idea. Now, you might say, Matthew, there's loads, and I'd love you to share at the end in the Q&A. But I mainly know of purpose being top down. That's going to sound horrendous, but I feel it's correct. And there's various books and articles and stuff I can refer to here. But I really think that clarifying what it is we should be standing for as a business in regards to top line is something that has to be grasped by the senior leaders in an organization. Why? Because that's where power lies. We'll talk about that in a second. And they have their power to allocate resource. They have their power to shift priorities. They have the power to articulate the idea clearly and get people aligned. They have the will to defend it at board level and so on. So there's really something about, in your Horizon 3 top line purpose, how does this shift the business? That's something that should be held at the top. And it might be that it's literally a pyramid, as it were, of purpose, where the pyramid at the top is this narrower purpose around direction of the business. Middle level purpose is around how do we work better together, which is way more human, which is complex and awkward and requires a different sort of purposes. The goodness has to be a lot clearer. And then at the bottom is connection to the customer, basically, and to everyone's experience. Like, are we doing things the way we should? When someone calls a helpline, is there anyone at the end of the line? When someone has a watch that's broken, what's the lead time to fix it? So these kind of things are different levels of purpose. Let me just quickly show a couple of other things before I move off the subject of power. So basically in purpose, here's some other things to think about. Some other cherries and mines from recent experience of mine. Make sure, so cherries are good things, low-hanging fruit, things that you should be doing. Mines should be things you should be avoiding, obviously. So a couple cherries here would be, have a soul, know your DNA and stay true to it, which is basically when you start to define what your organization stands for, build upon those things that give you competitive advantage. Here's an example. Say it's fun. You might think, gosh, that sounds ridiculously pathetic, Matthew. But sometimes in innovation, the environment that people are working in, the fun, I can think of two examples of gaming businesses that are, one is a global player and the other is a disruptive startup, and both of these examples are in the Far East, I'm thinking of. And the disruptive startup, the reason that they're producing better products and the reason that the markets are talking about them more is because they've got a super fun culture. Like, it's just, for them, it's that they have a DJ. Now, I know you're like, oh, that's so passé, but people talk about it. It's better to say we have a DJ and it's fun to come to work than to say we cut all the costs and we now work in a shed somewhere. And to be honest, I would like a pay rise, but that's been cancelled for the last 2 years. So that's just one example of fun as your DNA. But it might be that for example, in health, maybe it's something around, here we go. Say it's something like wellness and well-being, that's your soul. You really are about sustainable investments or sustainable solutions. If that's the case, then you've got to make sure that's in everything you do. So the way you treat your people in the organization, the way you encourage people to innovate, the kind of people you bring into the business, how you deal with disruptive and negative behaviors, like badly disruptive behaviors, all that stuff has to be consistent. Next one, anchor your innovation strategies in driving growth. It's rather than just curiosity, be super careful that you're not just playing with ideas that excite you and you seem to be locked onto. Make sure that these ideas are differentiating, that they will diversify the market space, that you're going somewhere unexpected, because that unexpectedness, the surprise element, is what creates, anti-fragile transformation or disruptive change. It's the surprise that's the exciting bit, but it has to be surprise that produces growth. It can't just be, well, we wasted a lot of money on this amazing idea and we don't know whether or not the clients still want it. I can think of so many examples of that in all sorts of solutions, like water treatment solutions or AI applications. There's loads of places where these are great ideas, but there's no buyer. There's no market for this, or the market is not ready for it, for example. The last one, create innovations that your children are proud of or your enemies are jealous of. These are good things, good barometers. Are you creating something that's, I'm not going to go back to the paying taxes from AI surveying your house, but is this something that you're really proud of doing for your kids? Are you producing a better, freer, more liberated world, one where, you know, people feel less controlled, or not, is the other way of saying it. And then finally, on the minds, don't talk a big game about innovation. People that talk too much about innovation aren't doing enough innovation. Show it in your actions and proofs. Fake it till you make it doesn't work in innovation, right? You can't just talk a good game. You can't talk about how, I heard one recently, which was an AI partner was working with HR departments and organizations to say, we're plugging AI into your corporate surveys. Many people are saying this, but what they were saying was that we will then correlate that to succession planning and talent mobility. So we will actually say, based on AI's deductions, we can tell you who's good to be promoted next and who should be moved to what market based on the dynamic of that market, its needs, how the culture is, what kind of leader works well there. And they said all of that was automated. I'm worried because I've not seen them be able to deliver it yet for any of the clients they're talking about. And yes, it sounds sexy, but there's a point where you got to back up some of your talk with proofs and actions, and they haven't done that. So be super careful. Make sure you can walk the talk. Don't waste your time in old thinking. If you've got an old idea and there's a difference here between what I mean by old thinking. It's not so much the what. The what can be old thinking, like it's a really good idea to do this, but the how can be a waste of time. So, for example, the film Up, that was created 32 times before they finally created a version they wanted, and you can imagine the 31 failures, right? So it's not so much they were wasting the time in old thinking. What they were doing is that they knew that they understood the expectations of the product they wanted to create, and they hadn't met it, so they were killing old ideas very quickly. So that's not so much, that's not wasting time in old thinking. It's quite the opposite of saying, I know what I want to achieve. But so many people get lost in old thinking, and they're just, the how is in a cycle, and they're trying the same thing again and again and again without any success. I would suggest kill it. One of the key things to mind here would be kill the idea and move on. Don't assume purpose is driven or understood from bottom up. I've mentioned that already. Stop that. Right. I'm aware of my time. Don't worry. I'm going to speed up because we want to get to the Q&A. Here's some challenges around power. So what do I mean by power? I mean authority. I mean decision-making and action-orientated authority. It's what I am responsible for, and yeah, I am responsible. It's in my role, and I'm accountable for it. It's those three things that people seem to have lost. So most organizations I go into nowadays talk a lot about, we can't fix this until the roles and responsibilities are clarified, or we can't innovate correctly until people are accountable for either the successes or the mistakes or whatever, right? And so that's what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about power. I'm talking about that responsibility and accountability bit. I'm not talking about sort of people running around with sticks beating people. I'm talking much more practical, talking about the ability to get things done. Right, firstly, groupthink, same old, same old. This is an example of an organization that has a group of very nice brands, maison they call it, and they have, let's say 50 to 20 different maison, different sizes. Some are small but highly profitable, some are medium size, some are obviously big, but they have a slightly different governance approach. But the small to medium sized exciting brands that they have, they've done one thing which I think is fatal in innovation. And what they've done is they've created, I'll use a synonym, they've created a centralized creative committee, let's call it that. And what happens is the centralized creative committee is the people that have the budgets that own the group. And then you have a table of about 4 or 5 of the same old people that did really good 30 years ago, like really amazing in luxury. But what happens is that every brand ends up having to produce the strategy plans and the new creative ideas to this committee. And the committee will basically give them advice, give them steers, kind of, let's just say, audit the strategies. Now, what happens with the same old thinking? So the same old means 2 things. Same old means old people, and same old means same old thinking. So it's actually it's about profile thinking, and it's also about the type of thinking, right? And what they found is that all the products started to look the same. So there was no differentiation. Let's just say it's in watches, right? example. So all of these watches started to look the same. And the reason they started to look the same is not because there was bad innovation inside of these businesses. It's because the process of deciding on what strategies they should pursue that are funded was centralized. They had to go through this old committee, and the old committee was thinking the same way they'd always thought. So the group think, in a sense, was, which is the power, was killing the creativity. People weren't allowed to experiment with ideas that committee didn't like. So that's a real governance issue. You've got to be super careful that all ideas go past by Rome. Like, that's not the case. Huh? You should definitely be avoiding that. Next one, lost that loving feeling. Very quickly, what does that mean? There was you have to guard this carefully. You might find, let me use the quote example here, a large entertainment, no, not large entertainment business. It's a group of entertainment companies that are all studios. So they can be everything from 15 to 100 people big, the studios, right? So, but then the group obviously owns this portfolio of businesses. But what they found was that the people the MDs leading all of these smaller businesses, they'd all got to the point where they were playing the rat race, the corporate rat race. They owned the innovation, but they owned more the P&L. So, and this is an interesting point, that there is a challenge between finding space to innovate and create and owning the responsibility of the profit and loss, which is just, it's like one of those horrible paradoxes that business hasn't really resolved. Because what a recent study in this business showed was that the group of MDs were called cynical, disillusioned, and passive. That was the key three attributes. What does that mean? It means although they were charged with building 2 or 3 amazing titles a year and innovating in their space, they kind of lost romance with the players and the games and the ideas, and they just kind of lost that loving feeling. They stopped playing with and experimenting with their products. They spent more time with Excel spreadsheets at home working on the finances than they did falling in love with the game. But why is this a problem for power? Because they were still the figurehead of decision making. So what was happening is that they were so focused on commercial value and so focused on profit and loss that they'd lost connection with the customer and the actual product, to the point that their judgment was now wrong. The passion was lost. You've got to be super careful that you don't have passionless people with the power to make decisions in innovation. It just is a death knell. It doesn't work. Huh? Okay, next one. Organizing your own surprise party. I'll be super quick in the last couple. Organizing your own surprise party is an example of an organization that tried to centralize its innovation initiatives. It gamified it. It called it, an envisioning program, whatever they call it, right? But the challenge is that the purpose of the program was to be surprised by innovations inside the business. But what they did is they centralized the program. So there was no moment that the program wasn't screening, selecting, and investing in ideas that hadn't gone through the selection panel, the team that had organized this surprise innovation program. So there was no opportunity for surprise, because it was centralized. It was all localized into a power structure that allowed visibility and screening, a bit like a PMO, project management office, of all of these innovation initiatives. That will not facilitate surprise. So there's a concept in anti-fragile transformation, which is about, how do we innovate and shift the business without breaking it, which talks about satelliting and decentralizing, where if you really do want to be surprised, you need to leave people alone. You need to push the initiatives out into the business. You give them you allocate a budget, or you find out a way that where the budget can be given without scrutiny of what is in the budget. It's like a surprise package, as it were, which is and maybe there's different levels of escalation that goes through a committee that's not linked to the comics, the executive committee. And what happened is that the key thing here is to dislocate surprise from governance. Because if you don't dislocate those, you're not going to be surprised at all. In fact, it's a bit like the same thinking. You're going to end up seeing the same options. You're going to push the same options. So make sure you dislocate those. And then the last one here about big bucks, big expectations, big players. Now, this is a big one about power and innovation, which is that as you start to put all of your eggs in a couple baskets, as you start to think, this is the best product that we've come up with. This is the product that the market is going to like most. The customers are screaming out for this particular product. Then what happens is you start saying, right, we need to fund this correctly. Maybe need to go and get a tranche of funding. We need to go and find new partners, whatever. Now, what happens the minute you start focusing your priorities on things that require funding is all of a sudden the power starts shifting. You stop. So this great idea you've had, all of the control you had of it starts to dilute as soon as big bucks start coming. Because as the big bucks, the funds start coming, big expectations start rising. You start to have scrutiny and overwatch. And then big players start coming in. So you start to have people that from the funding departments or the people at the banks or the venture capitalists, they start turning up, and they don't send small junior people, they send senior people, they send big people that ask difficult questions. Not even necessarily good questions sometimes. And having spent a lot of my life working with PE partners, often they don't ask the right questions, but nonetheless, the power is with them, it's their money. So what happens is that as you start to invest more money and you start to get bigger expectations and you start to get bigger players involved, you're going to have to learn how to manage the power, because your power is going to depreciate. And as it depreciates, your ability to get your own way depreciates. And that's super challenging. So we can talk about in a minute the so what. So maybe in one of your questions, you can say, all right, so how do you dissipate that then, Matthew? How do you somehow remove the power from these big players with big expectations? Okay, let me move on because I'm going to be done in 1 minute. Here's some quick examples of cherries and mines, and I'm done after the slide and we'll go straight to Q&A. Here's a couple examples of things that I think that are good to chase and things that you should avoid. This first one, prioritize your innovation ambitions based on growth, resource, transversality, importance, and focus on top 3%, and devolve 97 is actually, it's a good thing to remember that, because that is the statistics from the consulting firm's 3 Horizon innovation program. So they had Horizon 1, remember, which is op excellence, Horizon 2, transversality, and Horizon 3 is the growth. So the proportion of innovative initiatives, it's a hard thing to say, the proportion of them that went in front of the senior people that were sitting at the top of the apex of power, as it were, was only 3%. So in the case of this global consulting firm, it was 70 out of many thousand projects. So, and why is that important? Because if you prioritize based on ambition, growth, resource, and transversality, then what happens is that you start to focus your attention correctly onto the innovations that matter for you. Because if you don't have this differentiation of horizons, you've got 100% responsibility and control and accountability over all of the innovation. But there's no way you can do that. There's just in terms of time, in terms of like passion and energy, in terms of a will to actually see something happen, like just delivery. Because the more that you start focusing on many things, the more lead time you start adding onto your delivery and transformation or innovation. I see that. So I had a be careful my language here, but I had a client who last week created a new vision for themselves that was called getting shit done and dusted. That was literally their new tagline, was getting the merd done and dusted. Because basically they got to the point where they just had so many things rolling. They had so many initiatives and programs and projects that were all about enhancement, but nothing was like knocked off the table. Nothing was completed. Nothing was ended to the point they don't talk about. So that's why you need to create these differentiations so that you can actually start to say, it's done. My 3%'s done. My 50%'s done, whatever. Okay, next. Create agile governance structures to support different horizons of innovation. I told you already. Agile governance structures will mean don't have the same people leading all of these decisions. So literally, like, decentralized power. Start to create governance structures that bring in different perspectives, diverse perspectives, younger perspectives, outside perspectives. And your decision making shouldn't all go through. You shouldn't have single points of failure in your decision making hierarchy, your tree. So make sure that you literally disassociate your governance structures. It might meet again with the top 4 people, for example, who then have visibility on all of these governance structures. But I would make sure that the accountability and responsibility is localized. So that's why you need agile governance. Last point, actively share actively share and platform postmortems, after action reviews, and lessons learned. So not all innovation works well, and power can become negative if fear of mistakes or errors comes in, or we keep making the same mistakes again. So fear becomes a negative power source. How do you change that? Well, it's by actively discussing, everyone in the same room, postmortems, after action reviews, and lessons learned. Because what you're looking for is you're looking for someone to hear something and go, right, I've got an idea on how to not do that again. Or that's called positive deviance. I've got an idea of how to bring this forward. And it's only done by the sharing. And then 3 minds are, don't let commercial people drive innovation. Sorry for saying that. Sorry if anyone's in that room. But the problem with that is exactly what I said earlier on about it tends to dislocate your passion from what you're doing, and you start to control everything. You start to create governance structures where all roads lead back to you. You start to get anxious about big players with big expectations bringing big money. I would be super careful if you're double hatting responsibility of the P&L with the responsibility for innovation. Terrifying. There are a few people in the world that can do that, but they're billionaires. And the rest of us have real issues balancing those 2 things. Don't attempt to keep dead donkeys alive, which is basically know when your innovation is broken, know when it doesn't work, and then kill it. And then finally, don't punish mistakes and failures. In innovation, the worst thing to do is to create a blame culture or to point fingers at mistakes. It's literally one of the worst things you can do, because people start hiding and they start avoiding taking responsibilities. And it's literally the worst thing. Right, that's it. I've gone super fast, but I want to make sure that I answer questions. So, Joanne, do you have anything that can help in the background while I'm trying to get my Q&A up there?
Yes.
3 questions.
Okay, Matthew, so we have a few questions. And
yeah.
do you want me to hit you with them? So one of the first questions came from Kieran Duggan. He asked, Matthew, on your first slide, you have simple referred to. Can you talk around this? Simple
because it seems so commonsensical that purpose and power are important in innovation. Like it seems simple that why we are innovating, what it is we stand for as an organization, who the good is for, is something we all take for granted. And the reason we take it for granted is to do with hemispheric rivalry. It gets a bit boring, but it's a neurological issue, which is that we start to left prefrontal cortex everything. Everything is like breaking it down, solving solutions. It's about things. I mean, innovation is the perfect example about focusing on things. And we know that the brain is essentially, there's lots of research on this. There's only 2 things the brain thinks about: things and people, right? And what happens in innovation is you become absolutely myopic about things. And we start getting through this process of optimizing the thing solution. And we totally forget like the human element of, why am I doing this? Like, who am I supposed to be doing this for? And so that's what I meant by simple. It seems so obvious and so simple that we seem to have ignored it. But I would start, so what does simple mean here? It means ask yourself the question in purpose, why am I doing this? Who is the good for? And how do I keep everyone behind this so that they're motivated, they're passionate, they're enthused, they think it's worthwhile? So that would be what I mean by simple. And then the power thing is, hey, we can talk a lot about being in a post-power society, but that's utterly nonsense. Power is still the essence of absolutely everything. There's a reason why power is so heavily discussed in academic literature. And again, it's a simple thing. And if you are on this call and you're someone who has the responsibility for innovation, play with the power theme. Like, how do I get it away from me? How do I get it towards passionate people? How do I give people space to innovate and surprise? How do I give space to people to be free from the commercial bondage and power play that comes with funding in order to create the surprising value? And then how do we talk about all that in a healthy way? So that's what I mean by simple.
Okay, great, thank you. Quite a specific question from somebody who's looking at the development of a platform in the music tech space. They have done extensive user testing over the last few months and have found their problem solution to be viable, but they're entering a competitive market with a lot of money. So from your end, Matthew, in order to get the project to market, what would you advise are the key milestones to hit in the early stages of development?
Why are you going into a competitive market space? So it'd be like going to war with a stick. Be like, why am I doing this? So if you think we have a differentiation, I mean, we'd have to ask more questions to say, what is different about your particular approach? What impact do you expect to have? This is a good question to ask. What impact do you expect to have on your user, your listener, that the others don't? And if the answer is there is no difference, then you've got a problem with purpose straight away. So then you've got to say, okay, so what do people care about? What kind of good do I want to create with my product, right? Just say that, for example. And say, for example, there's something about you want to be fairer with artists in terms of how much money they make, certainly smaller artists. Artists that maybe only get a couple thousand listens in Spotify are making no money from Spotify. So there's no way of platforming them or investing in them. So maybe it's something around a fairer fees or something maybe around you want to target a certain type of music, like maybe it's a style of music that it's like garage band or something like that, or so the key here thing is who are you trying to create the novelty for? And then the other thing is, how do you get heard? That's another thing that's quite important, because you can easily just your noise in a commoditized space, your noise needs to be particularly loud. So you need to probably work out exactly what that purpose and good value proposition is, and then find a way to amplify your voice. Now, it could be something around fairness. Just as a quick point here on purpose, I said to you that no one was talking about social and environmental 10 years ago, and I still think that's true. But I think that's not true today. I think the idea of like social justice, social equality, environmental responsibility, etc., are really big themes. You will get heard on these themes. And I think that dovetailing your purpose with something that you know people care about, and it's not about being inauthentic, because there's still authenticity there, because you then bring in people into your team that truly care. Here's a quick example of this, and I'll shut up in this question, is that when Saatchi and Saatchi tried to flip their business and operating model, they were not tenable until they brought Adam Verbach in. And the reason that they brought Adam Verbach in is because he'd come from Greenpeace, and he was the opposite of what they were used to. So if you're thinking, right, I want to raise a voice, we want to be different in our space, you need to raise that voice, you have to be credible, right? So maybe there's something about who you partner with this new music startup business. Maybe it's who you partner, it's a certain voice you bring in, maybe it's leveraging like a societal theme. I don't want to sort of get too obvious in my answers here, but you can start to imagine what kind of certain themes you would associate with music that you could definitely play. But I would go back to the purpose questions, because if you're going into commodity space, it's the Bowman clock thing I spoke about. How do you differentiate yourself to be heard? Because if your value proposition is not significant or obvious rather in a commoditized space, it's difficult. I'm being polite, but it's very difficult.
Okay, I'm going to quickly blast through another couple of them, please, Matthew. So SMEs typically have neither the time or money or bandwidth to truly innovate. How do you suggest they resolve this dilemma?
Ooh, I mean, how many hours are in the day? That's a really, I am, okay, simple line, I've said this already, try and dislocate commercial from innovation. Like it's great people like Elon Musk and everyone else can do it, or they can do it, but we can't. Like it's really, I would bring in a business partner. I would find some talent to join your team. And what you want them to do is you want them to be the sensibility of the commercial side. They do all the admin. They do all of the business administration. They make sure that you are doing all the management issues that need to be done. Because there is a challenge that you will not create a successful business if you're in the innovative space and you're not innovating. So I would say that that's a purpose statement, that you just have to create that space between you from the commercial and the innovation, which means you might need to bring other people in. You might need to find some partners or find some funding that allows you to go and recruit a partner.
Okay, great. Next one, have you ever seen innovators turn the table on the investors to get them to ask the right question to get them on board with the new innovation?
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, so have you ever seen innovators turn the table on the investors to get them to ask the right questions to get them on board with the new innovation?
Honest answer, no. But it's to do with the power play that I'm talking about. As soon as you're asking for money, the other side thinks they have all of the power. Gosh, I've been here 1,000 times. But what you can do is you can walk the horse to the water a little bit. So you can structure your presentation. I mean, here's an example. There is BlackRock basically has now given CSR targets to its investment portfolio to basically say, if you're not serious about sustainability, BlackRock will literally disrupt your business. So there's been examples of board members fired in some of the portfolio, but I mean, big businesses. BlackRock has made board members stand down because they haven't delivered on their CSR commitments. So the secret there is not to give BlackRock a commitment, because BlackRock knows what it wants. You know, they've got all the power. They're going to decide. But when you're pitching for money, the secret is to know what they stand for. This is the purpose connection. So another way of describing purpose is, what do you stand for? It's the easiest way of thinking about purpose. So you can very quickly work out what these investors and funders care about most. What do they stand for, right? So for example, here's a quick example. I worked with someone who used to work in a global luxury brand, who then left to set a family and a sustainable family investment consultancy. And what he means by that is, they called it impact investments. And what they basically have done, so it's an interesting idea, is that they are an investment company that goes to billionaires who want to save the world and says, then we will manage your investments and your impact investments. If you don't want to create the Gates Foundation, or maybe you're not a billionaire, maybe you're just a millionaire, but you do want to give back. You want to focus on climate change or on whatever it is, right? What this consulting firm does is it literally manages those investments on behalf of these families. So it's actually a family impact investments, right? So that was an easy business, because what they'd done, they'd worked out what the value proposition, or the values were rather, what they stand for in the investors, the billionaires, and then they just created a business proposition or model that just matched exactly their expectations. So that's the better way to do it. The better way to do it is reverse, find the investors that are aligned with you in terms of purpose, because you will not change investors' minds. And here's my last point: be very careful if you're not aligned, because the big bucks, big expectations, big players, you'll get kicked out. And I know so many stories of investors kicking out startup entrepreneurs or early co-founders of businesses, because they don't see things the same. You just got to be careful. Often some of these investors are cash only. They're really focused on their returns, and that can be dangerous too if they don't have a long vision.
We're going to chance one last one, Matthew, and it's around failure.
Cool.
So innovation, in my experience, is more often than not about failure. We need to value failure. How do you think we can start doing this?
By having what I call real conversations, which is forget feedback culture. Feedback culture is awful. Feedback culture ends up just being a mechanism for criticism, and then it ends up just being the people that always give feedback anyway are the people that shout louder about giving feedback. I would just be super careful talking about feedback. What I would talk about though is I would create what we call rituals and artifacts that have the purpose of real conversations about the work we've done. So what I mean by that is sitting around a room with a flipboard and a couple beers or some herbal tea, whatever it is you want. And the idea here is to say, how did this go, right? So should we, what did we learn? It's about, honestly, learning from failures is about how do you frame the interaction. So what do we think we could have done better? It's coaching questions. Like anyone who's done coaching knows this. What did we expect to achieve? Where could we have done better? If we were to do it again, what would we do differently? Okay, what's our next step? Like that kind of stuff. And then what you do is you have and then you literally have sometimes rules of engagement, which is you can't criticize, you can't blame, you can't talk about how, it's a bit like, I hate to say it, but in Parliament, they have these rules, many parliaments, where you're not allowed to refer to a member as having been something naughty. It's all very indirect, right? But maybe that's a way to do it, because the problem with failure is when people take it personally. It's called the Pascal's problem in psychology, which is Blaise Pascal basically said that humans fear most being exposed as having the fatal weakness they don't want anyone to see. So what happens is we create this mutual contract between humans, which is, let's not talk about that thing that I'm really bad at, and don't you tell me about that thing you're bad at, and let's just all live in status quo, right? So if people have, let's not fight that. People have like a deep fear of being exposed in certain things, right? So let's not go that way. Let's go about there used to be a thing in one of my previous lives, in one of my previous careers, we used to say, attack the position, not the person. And that's exactly how you do mistakes, which is, let's analyze, critique what happened, not who did what. Like, it's really important, because it's inference. People already know that. And then my last thing about rituals is it has to be frequent. Do it loads. But it's the muscle memory of dealing with and even don't call it. I mean, people say don't use the word mistakes or failures. Talk about, you know, gifts and all that sort of stuff. I think that's also a bit silly. Like, it's okay to say it's a mistake. Right? I make millions of mistakes every day. I probably made 15 on this call. So it's okay to make mistakes. I'm like, and actually, here's my last thing. In innovation, vulnerability in terms of your knowledge, your expertise, and your ability to do the best thing should be embraced. Don't try and be perfect. I know way too many innovators that think they're Elon Musk, and they're not. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Allow yourself to just get comfortable with being authentically open to learning and developing. So for me, the mistakes is about growth mindset. You really need to create a culture where we're just open about it. So anyway, that was a long answer.
Matthew, on that note, we're 2 minutes past our closing time, and we'll have to wrap up. Thank you so much. I think we can all agree that was a really fruitful, informative, and thought-provoking session. We could listen to for another hour, I think, if we had it, but not today. On behalf of InterTradeIreland and Queens University, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to the audience as well for watching. This live or this recorded stream will be available on the Queens University website in the coming days. So please check out Queens University Business Engagement web pages. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice, productive afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Loved it. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.